Hi, everyone, and welcome to this first episode of the Beyond the Physics podcast. This is your host, Joseph Guzman. So, I'm very excited to be bringing this content out to you. It's been a long time coming. So, I'm just grateful that we're at the point now where you can be here listening to it. And hopefully, you guys enjoy what I got in store for you. And I've uploaded an accompanying introduction to the podcast where I try to describe my background and my expertise, basically just letting you know who the hell I am, as well as introduce my co-host, Irene Roman, and the goals of the podcast. So please, if you haven't listened to that, I recommend you check that out first. Assuming everyone here has listened to that introduction, though, we can just move straight on to tonight's conversation. So, tonight, Irene and I are joined by our good friend, Terence. So, Terence was a graduate student in physics. However, he's recently decided to leave the program for other ventures. And as such, I think he has a unique perspective on the field, which I am keen to pick apart and try to understand. If I were to try to summarize tonight's conversation, though, it would probably be fair to say that the main theme or motif of the conversation was on the importance of critical thinking and self-deconstruction. We start the conversation, though, describing Terence's motivations and how he found himself interested in physics. And if you're at all like me, you'll find this particular point perhaps inspirational. Then we go on to talk about Terence's experience with religion and how that directly correlates with his experience with science. So it's interesting to hear how he's come to grapple with these two competing philosophies. Next, we briefly talk about spirituality and whether we feel that there is a place for spirituality within physics. And naturally, then we have a brief discussion about drugs and whether some psychoactive drugs have a potential usefulness or utility function in increasing the broader general public's capacity for empathy or self-awareness. And finally, we briefly discuss education and how we might go about increasing children's critical thinking capacities within the K-12 program, for instance. Anyways, I think that briefly summarizes the conversation. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, please stick around. And since this is the first episode of the podcast, I ask that you please leave us your ratings, comments, criticisms. I really need to get a sense of what you guys think I'm doing right, as well as what you guys think I'm doing wrong. Anyways, with all that said, I welcome you to our conversation with our good friend, Terence. This is Beyond the Physics. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Physics. I'm your host, Joseph Guzman, and I'm joined with my two guests, Irene Roman, potential co-host, also graduate student in physics. Say hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm Irene Roman.
Just so they recognize your voice. And then our main guest today is Terence, who is, I guess now officially, a former graduate student in physics.
Feels great.
Feels great to be free.
Exactly.
Right. So I think we'll probably spend some more time going into questions about like how you feel about being free and stuff like that. But just, I guess, briefly, like now that the chains of graduate school are released upon you, what's been going on in your life?
So, great question, man. I think, I've been kind of taking it easy right now, but I guess the journey is to now go the full entrepreneur route. So we're going to try to have something going here. I got a bunch of different ideas. That's always the easy part, right?
Yeah.
But the action is the hard part. So now it's really the true test to see where I'm going to be going here. But yeah, man, I'm just working on some things, some random things. Of course, the podcast.
Right.
Shameless plug. Our podcast, Eigen Bros. You can find it on YouTube. And yeah, a bunch of other crap.
Excellent. So,
hopefully some of this crap sticks to the wall and something happens.
Yeah, and I think we'll go into more detail about what that other crap actually is. But that's great. I mean, like thinking about, being done with graduate school, it's just like it's a whole nother level of like working, and like your body needs to really adjust to like, I think, not working at that level.
Yeah.
Right. Like, because when I imagine like when I'm done with school, like the weight that's going to be off my shoulders is like, I feel like I need like a year of like decompression time to like get out of that mindset. Right.
Surprisingly, actually, I felt very relieved immediately. Like, well, maybe it was also because I was already taking it kind of easy towards the end, because I was only taking one class, and that was still like we were in it, but I was already on my decline, we could say, or my phoning it in. Right. So, I mean, I felt like it was pretty quick decompression, honestly.
Right. Okay. So you feel like you definitely feel comfortable that you made the right decision. Though,
yeah.
Right. For you.
I definitely know I did for myself. Yeah. Okay. And actually, to be honest, this is always part of the plan in some ways.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was kind of always in the back of my mind. I kind of dictate my life in a very go with the flow manner in a sense, but there's always kind of a very loose plan in the background. So, I've always known I wanted to do something like business or entrepreneurship, and I really like tech stuff, right? And I love, physics. And the thing was, I always felt like I wasn't quite there in terms of what I wanted with physics, especially at the end of undergraduate. And, I was like, I need to go to grad school. This is one of the pathways I need to take in order to get myself to the level I want to be. But the thing is, you can't go to grad school for free, if you're not going the full PhD route. Right. So it's kind of like... I'm kind of a school hacker.
I see.
It's what I call myself in some ways, or just a life hacker in general. And I try to maximize the amount of benefits I can get with something, even though it may not be the traditional pathway.
Right.
I just need to go down the path that I think makes the most sense to give me the highest yield. But also, it's not gonna hurt anyone or anything, because I mean, there's no other way you can really do this if you want to go high, or you want to take yourself to a high level of physics, right? So I don't know how familiar people are with this, especially a layman audience. You can get basically free tuition as a graduate student, which is unusual, I think, for many other majors. It's kind of an exclusive thing for the sciences.
Right. It's not necessarily free, right? It's just covered by your job.
Yeah.
Which is teaching.
As far, it's not, you're not going to have to come out of pocket yourself.
Right, exactly.
You should be able to have a sustainable life with this pathway into science.
Right.
So I knew that was the route. I knew that was something that was the way to go. So that was what I took as my opportunity to move ahead in life and learn more information and learn the skills I needed to take myself to the next steps of what I want to have business-wise.
Right. So when you say like you wanted to take it to the next level,
yeah.
Right. How did you conceptualize that in your head? Like, what does that exactly mean? Like, where do you draw the line of like, okay, I have this level of knowledge, like with a bachelor's degree in physics, presumably. Why was that not enough?
So I guess bachelor's degree is sufficient, but for me, I wanted to be completely sure that it was sufficient. So I felt okay with bachelor's knowledge. Like I definitely thought I could make a business with that. But with graduate, I've thought, this is the next level, where really the thing I wanted in graduate school I didn't get was more lab experience. So in undergraduate, I was very experienced with working in the lab.
Right.
But with graduate, I wanted even more because I still didn't feel like I had a good understanding of machinery. So I worked in, as you know, I worked in condensed matter physics. So that's just a fancy way of saying solids and liquids. And in condensed matter physics, you need to do things related to materials. So material science would be in that realm. and you use a lot of machinery. So you use a lot of magnets, electricity, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And machines. And the thing is, I wanted to do something in industry or related to that, right? But I didn't have any experience with any big machinery or any leading edge equipment. And the only way you can get your hands on this kind of stuff, at least also at the breadth that I wanted, is in the sciences. Right. You can't even really get that in industry. Because in industry, what happens is usually they'll throw you onto like a one particular machine or something. And they say, oh, you get really good at this one machine.
Right.
And for me, that's like, okay, it's kind of cool, but you're so limited. So you only know one machine, which is not something I'm really interested in. Right. So with physics, it's just beautiful because I could get a broad knowledge of a bunch of different machines. And in particular, the group I went with was that kind of group where I got a lot of knowledge with a bunch of different machinery. And these are, $1 million, $500,000 pieces of equipment that you could not ever use really in real life. It's just, there's no real way to get your hands on that for people to trust you to use that. So, and only a graduate student could get that and be as dumb as they are, and still be able to use the machinery that is that expensive.
Right.
So I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for me.
Okay.
And I got a lot of experience with it still because I got to put my hands on a lot of the different pieces of equipment, but it still wasn't as much as I was expecting when I got in the program. And it actually turned out to be much more of a theoretical buffering of my knowledge, which is still useful. Right. So I think I got something out of that.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, the motivations for going into graduate school seem very... I think that's a unique perspective. I don't know how many people would...
Yeah, I think it's an unusual one, right? Because most people want to go down the full PhD track. They want to be the next Einsteins or the next Diracks or something. Me, I'm just like, no. I want to start my own business. I want to make a weird path that nobody else really does. And it's not really a path that anyone has a school for, right? There's no physics path for an entrepreneur. Right. There's no Elon Musk path. So I was like, I got to create my own path in the way that I want to create it. And I think it's just, that's kind of how I've always been, I've kind of known what I want to do, but a lot of stuff that I like to do, there's no real set way to do it. So I kind of have to shape and mold myself in a system to get where I want to get to.
Right. But I guess the next question I would have from that is like, what gave you the inclination that learning these machines would be useful for your entrepreneurial ventures? Like, what did you vision in your mind, like, would come out of that, or could you use it for in the first place?
So yeah, it's a great question. I didn't know necessarily that I was going to have particular utility in those specific machinery that I'm using, but I came from a spintronics research group in undergraduate, and spintronics for everybody out there is just a different kind of computing architecture. So it would be like, I guess not even that. It's a bunch of different things related to using spin, I guess. Right. So spin, also for everybody out there, is just a property, or it's a, what can you say? I guess it's a property of subatomic particles, or even not even subatomic. It could be property of molecules, where basically particles are like tiny magnets. And the spin of that particle would be... the magnetic moment of that particle, which is like, if you can picture a bar magnet, a spin would be just like a tiny little bar magnet. So if it's pointing north and south, that spin would be that north-south direction that it's pointing. And
so you mean that spin as in like the rotation clockwise or counterclockwise?
I didn't want to say that because, as you know, that name's kind of a misnomer, right? Because the particle is not actually spinning. And also it's a little bit complicated because I didn't want to get into that because then you have to bring in angular momentum and whatnot. But yes, they call it spin because
so generalized, more just angular momentum.
Yeah. So I don't know particularly who your audience is gonna be, but for the layman, there's a property of spinning objects where something that's spinning has something called angular momentum. Don't really get too hung up on what that means exactly, but that's essentially what spin is. But if you want to make it really simple, just think of it as a tiny bar magnet.
Okay.
And anyway, I forget what I was saying. So my research group did spintronics.
Right.
And I knew I liked that stuff. and it's related to computing and whatnot. I've always kind of fallen back to computing stuff. So one thing is I do in life is I always collect a bunch of knowledge, it seems, related to particular fields. And I feel like I'm always collecting knowledge related to computing somehow. And it's not even like purposeful. It's like almost accidental. It just happens to, I always keep landing on computing stuff, information. I kind of think of myself as a guy who loves information. And I kind of just keep going back to that, right? So what I did was with my research group, I got into a group at our school that does spintronics research as well. So I knew that the machinery that I was working with was going to be useful for the path I'm going towards, which seems to be something computing.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting because I don't really quite know where I'm going in life, right?
Okay.
But I have a general like weird like river that I'm going down, where I'm kind of for the ride, but I can kind of like steer the river towards like a fork in the road every now and then.
I see.
So
a lot of the decisions, at least post bachelor's, right, in your life seem to have been like no conscious plan, right? Just or whatever your like gut intuition has led you, you've kind of just trusted that. And
in a sense, yeah. But I always feel like you got to take the big opportunities in life when they're given to you. So I've always kind of taken really big opportunities when I can, and I'll steer myself towards those big opportunities and then really gear myself down in that direction in a sense. So it's like there's a conscious plan, but it's not really like a well formulated plan. I find it too limiting to have too much of a regimented plan. So I try to just go where the opportunities take me, as long as it's in a direction that's interesting to me.
Right. And so this totally isn't like the structure I had planned at all, but the conversations like one question that I had is basically, what was exactly, could you describe the transition period? I know previously you worked in telecommunications, is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
Was that before or after your bachelor's?
That was after my bachelor's.
Okay, so the progression is you went to get your bachelor's in physics.
Yep.
And then afterwards you found a job in telecommunications.
Exactly. So I got hired pretty quick, actually. So immediately as I graduated, I got hired for the job. This is a pro tip for all you guys looking for jobs soon or in the near future. Go to career fairs. Career fairs will be the way you get a job. Online isn't going to do it. Don't even bother. Well, I mean, you can bother with it, but if you're not getting all the little check marks, people are lazy and they just use it as a filter. But if people see your face in a career fair, you can get hired. That's how I got hired. So I got hired for the telecommunications job, and I worked there for like roughly a year.
Right.
And it was a really cool job, and I actually learned a lot. Once again, that's related to like networks again, and like a little bit of computing, not so much, but it's still related to like all the stuff I've been doing.
Yeah.
So, and basically what I did was I would set up like fiber optic nodes.
Okay.
So the first day on the job, basically I set up a node. It was in Texas, and we set up this fiber optic node, and it took about a week. But I worked that first week on the job. I worked 96 hours, and that was pretty much set the tone for the rest of the job.
Oh my gosh.
So I was literally working over 70 hours a week at least every single week. And I was traveling all over the U.S. for like at least 70% of the time per month. So it was very much a job for a particular type of person.
Right, yeah.
Which is definitely like the kind of person who would be in like physics or something. So masochistic, to say the least.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing the connection now. Right. But okay, so the reason I bring that up is because you were mentioning that you basically try to follow where the big opportunities lead you, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, how is it that you go from a telecommunications job to where exactly is the room for the opportunity to sneak in to go into graduate school?
Okay. So that just came about because I got sick of doing that job. So that job, I think I felt like I learned everything I wanted to learn from it within about that little period of time, with maybe a few months' time. So it didn't have much room for growth, that job. And it also didn't have much room for, it didn't have the kind of learning that I wanted from it. It was kind of slow, and it was really like, most of it was, I really didn't like it because the way that job worked was basically no one knew what the hell anybody else was doing. And it was always passing blame to other people. So one thing about science is really cool and awesome is that everybody like talks with each other and problem solves with each other. And they speak about, how we can fix this issue. What are your ideas? And, what was your plan of attack? And you get different angles from people, and they're all about solving the issues. This job is just about passing the blame.
Right.
So basically, whoever messed up, that person did it. And it's never me. It's never that other person, or it's never myself. It's always the other guy. So it was just very much an environment of just like something that I knew I wouldn't enjoy. And, a lot of the solutions and things and the practices that were done were not very intelligent. But I mean, I guess that's all. You get that with business sometimes, right? It's hard to run a business.
Yeah.
What was the whole point of that? I forget.
Well, where was the motivation to where was the big opportunity that brought you to grad school?
Oh, so I was sick of the job. And I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here, right? Oh, how do you feel about cussing on your podcast? Okay, good.
It's okay. No restrictions.
I was like doing good, and then I was like, crap. Okay.
Say whatever you want to say, man.
Okay, fuck yeah. All right. So then what happened was I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here. Let's go find the next opportunity. So I was like, I definitely want to keep learning more physics. I felt like my knowledge of physics wasn't that good still. This kind of leads back to what I was saying before. I know I need to still build my business up, but I still don't feel like I have enough of an in yet. I need to know more niche things about the field I'm trying to go into. I need to find an area of attack where I can sneak in. I was like, the only way I'm really going to get that level, I think, is probably grad school. I can learn a lot, and I can hack school. And I got really good at hacking school in undergraduate, which I thought I was going to have the ability to do in PhD. Wrong.
Okay, so
very hard to hack school in PhD.
You're going to have to break that down for me. What do you mean by hack school?
Okay, so hacking school to me is basically doing school, the bare minimum work you need to do to pass the classes.
Okay.
So I didn't give a fuck about getting A's ever. So I was like, I can get B minuses and I'll be fine. I don't care. Okay. Even C's maybe are fine too. I think I got a couple C's in undergraduate. I was like, as long as I stay above a 3 something, I'm good. But then that means I can spend all the rest of the time that I would be otherwise using on getting A's and acing tests, doing research or doing SPS things, building my resume. So I got a lot of experience. I probably had a second year level or third year level graduate student level of research that I did in undergraduate. So I literally did research for 4 years in undergraduate.
Wow. Okay.
More than anybody else who was around me, at least in undergraduate. And I was pretty much the only one in my lab too. So I did everything in that lab pretty much. I was the grad student in my lab at that time pretty much as an undergraduate.
Okay.
So that's my definition of hacking school. So I did a lot of undergraduate research, and I also did a lot of SPS, which is Society of Physics Students stuff. So basically, it got me a nice little toy model of practicing with business. Right. So I got to kind of run a business in a very relaxed fashion, And it was also really interesting too because it's like running a business with no power. So no one has to give a shit to listen to you, right? Because nobody's being paid. So it's everybody's doing everything out of respect or just out of the goodness of their hearts. So it was interesting, and it's like a really cool, nice little starter pack for running your own business.
Right.
So that for me was hacking school.
Okay.
Basically being able to do other things besides the shit that you just need to get done just because, you have to satisfy these things. As opposed to having to dedicate all of your existence to just doing the arbitrary hurdles that they set up for you in school, which is basically what the PhD program was. So I had to use all of my effort to pass exams, to do all the little qual stuff and all that crap. And it left me almost zero time or zero energy, at least, to hack school.
Right.
So I hacked it way less effectively than I could in undergraduate.
Right. I think, Neil deGrasse Tyson's experience was similar. I think he dropped out of grad school the first time because he was doing extracurriculars, with like, I'm not sure if it was wrestling or what, but he learned the hard way that you can't balance things outside of grad school with grad school itself.
Which I think is a real detriment to grad school, honestly. Because to me, it's almost like you're just molding people into a singular, I don't know what you'd say, like a singular type of person. I guess it's still nice because there are different people do have diversity of their opinions and their or not opinions, but I should say their attack of like solving problems and things. But I think there's a little bit to be desired. It's too much. It's too much of a focus on just the hazing and the arbitrary barriers. I get it. It's got to be hard because you want to weed people out, right? Right. But I don't know. It just, to me, it got to such a level where it was not even worth it wasn't worth what I got back from it. Mm-hmm. Although I did get a lot of useful things from it for sure. Like I learned a shitload more than I probably would have ever learned on my own, just because I got to be put in that environment and given the allotted time to do that. But the barriers and things were just too much, where it was not worth it at that point. Right. Also, the length of time was too long.
Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, that's a major motivation for this podcast, and a major thing that I want to address is just like the amount of, well, I guess there's just, I might hesitate to use this word, but there's a lot of toxic, mentality when it comes to, I think, physics, grad school.
100%.
Right. Like the amount of workload, the perception of like what it is to be a physicist,
a real physicist.
Right. Exactly. like you need to be this certain, like you're saying, a certain type of person, a certain type of way right, of doing things. And I agree. I think it's pretty restrictive, and I think it's not to the benefit of physicists or scientists or the world in general, right? So
I agree. I think, although I think it's getting better, I think our generation, like our time, is reshaping that model, because we are getting more, like different kinds of people coming in, different ethnicities, different, we get more women in physics now than ever. We have all types of people coming in now, where I think I think we're changing that landscape, because the physics isn't the Wild West of the lone gunslinger now. The freaking like Dirac types or the Einstein types. You don't need that anymore. It's like we're like mega projects. We're like social now. We stress collaboration. People are memeing physics now and things like that. We're making physics podcasts. Physics is becoming more friendly towards that environment, I think. And it's kind of like the old guys are like, they're the last ones trying to hold on to that good old days of physics, where it was, just brutal, just this singular mentality of you must be the completely, introverted 100%, just I have to focus and do everything physics and nothing else. Right. Literally nothing else. Right. I think it's a dying breed.
Right. I mean, I do see what you're saying, and I am tempted to agree with you, right?
Yeah.
But I do see that the problem is here, right? And that's why I'm doing this.
I think it's universal, though.
Right.
I think that's just the atmosphere of what it is to be a physicist, especially nowadays. But I think we, as we're coming up, our generation is changing that slowly.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always going to be those kind of guys, I think. And also because, they're going to get that a bunch of people coming up like us are getting that instilled into them, because they've grown up with, they've looked up to guys like that. But I think as a whole, our generation is going to shift that. At least I hope. Yeah. I'm optimistic about the future, and I think that we will be the ones to change that. We're going to make physics more accessible, more fun, less... Just not so serious. Just chill the fuck out. It's not the most important thing to ever do. Right.
But
just have fun in life.
Yeah. Right. us here, all the physicists at this table, if we can title ourselves that, are in the minority group, right? So we would represent a lot of that diversity that you're talking about.
You mean racial minority? I guess we're in many minorities,
right? Yeah, many ways you slice that cake.
Yeah,
right? We're not a typical physicist.
Okay,
right? On the outside. Right?
Okay, yeah.
But not to put you on the spot, but Irene, how do you feel about the state of women in physics? Right? Like, do you feel like your experience in physics has been kind of oppressive by the amount of masculinity, I guess you could say? Is physics like a masculine science? Or
I think definitely it presents itself as that. I think that even starting at elementary school level or lower, right, women or girls don't see themselves represented in physics. So it's like you grow up, you see a role model, you connect with them, and then from there it might inspire you or push you forward to move in whatever particular roles you have. But if you're you're a girl and you see the majority of this field is dominated by men, you don't see much representation of yourself in that regard of your identity. So you may start feeling like, oh, perhaps that's not a correct field for me, or perhaps that's not something that I should even be aspiring to be. So I think it starts at even that kind of bare minimum level, just growing up. And on top of that, you also, I feel like personally, I've definitely had encounters with either men in physics or in science who have deterred me from even trying to go with the theoretical route, which I've always been interested in theoretical physics. And I particularly remember someone who I was asking for advice of how to move forward in this field. And he kind of deterred me and kind of made me feel like that wasn't a possibility for me.
Strictly on the basis of sex or on something else?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say it's strictly from sex, so maybe we shouldn't be mixing the two. Right. But because of messages that, I've gotten throughout my whole life, that's maybe something that I may have lumped in. Whether regardless it's correct or not, right. It's something that because you have some bias from the past that you might in the future still attribute this kind of stuff because, oh, I'm a woman, maybe I'm not supposed to be in this field. And then also I remember a lot of growing up in different classes, like science classes, physics classes, and you do kind of see some treatment towards kind of the boys in the class, perhaps, that they're pushed more towards the sciences, whereas the women are pushed more towards humanities or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like, nowadays it's getting better in terms of the teachers are trying to be more aware of this behavior and trying to be more like, encouraging all students. But I think there's still work to be done because I think it's still some inherent bias that a lot of people do have that have been going.
Right. And, physics is one of the worst offenders, right? So that's why it's important that we at least address this, right? We at least have a conversation about what it is to have this experience, right? And to say that that's not the way we would like it to be, right? We think the world ought to be some way that includes, as many minds as possible, right? That's really what scientists ought to care about, is the quality of your thinking and, the rationality of your arguments.
Well, to be fair, though, to the physics community, I think they have been trying to do that a lot lately. Because, we see in the Mag Lab, like they bring in the middle school girls, I think. I'm not sure where they're from, but they have like little tours for them. And it's like a good group of like, at least I want to say like 30 or 40 girls where they have them come up to the Mag Lab and then they show them around and things.
Right.
So I know they're trying to sow the seeds for the future, basically. Yeah. And it seems like they're getting better with that. We have, I think the woman who leads the LHC, she, that's woman. I mean, right. Yeah, so they're trying for sure.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, I mean, I don't mean to like.
So I'll give them credit, a little bit at least.
I agree with that, but it's still, I feel like it's still even that issue. I'm telling you, there's not as many women role models to look up to in science. That's a big issue, like a deterrent to begin with, So I feel like, yes, it's going to take some time for that to equalize. Like at physics, how many women faculty members do we have? I've only had one woman professor. since I've been in here, like in our university, there's not that many, right? So it's like even there, it's like you don't have any women to look up to, I guess.
No, I understand that, and I agree that there is an issue there, right? But I guess this is where we get into politics, right? If we're going down that rabbit hole, like this is where Jordan Peterson would step in.
Yeah,
and he would talk about equality of outcome.
Right.
So to break it down for you, Irene, is basically one of Jordan Peterson's big gripes is he's a clinical psychologist, right? He argues that that discrepancy that you see between men and women being in a certain field is due to their own interests, due to their own psychological makeup, right? He says men are more interested in things, generically speaking, so that's why they tend to be more in the sciences. And women tend to care more about, nurturing behavior. Like this is all like broad generalities. This is not true of any specific individual, but of the male and female, sex as a whole, right? And so, even regarding that, piece of information, I think there's still too much of a discrepancy, exactly. Too much of a delta that even if that were the case, then we're still not even at the level of representation that we ought to see. So I think there's still work that needs to be done, even if Jordan Peterson is correct, but I think it's something worth acknowledging. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, that definitely could be a possibility. I mean, I don't know enough about that. I haven't read enough articles about the research like that, so I wouldn't be sure how to answer that yes or no for sure. But I can see that being a possibility, of course. But like you said, I don't think it's at the equilibrium point where it would naturally fit in if there weren't some already deterrents for women.
Other barriers or obstacles.
Exactly, for women, over many, many years, right? Decades. So I think that there's still, like you said, more work to be done.
Right, great. But, okay, so I'd like to take a step back and try to put a frame on your experience, Terence, if that's okay. Do you think you could talk a little bit about your experience in your household, when you were growing up, I vaguely know of what your parents' occupations were, but what were their attitudes towards science? Were you personally pushed towards, scientific pursuits, or what kind of influences were around your childhood, I guess?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good question, man. My mom and dad were very encouraging of scientific stuff in general. I mean, my mom, I would probably attribute to, one of the first conscious memories of me even being interested in anything scientific. Funnily, it was probably for her own interest, because she gave me a human anatomy book when I was a kid. Of course, because how the mother wants the son to be the doctor and take care of her and whatnot.
I see. Yeah.
So she invested interest for sure.
Okay.
But little did she know that I was enthralled, man. That anatomy book that she got me, that first book, it was probably when I was 6. I literally took it to school every day, and I would just sit there. I wouldn't even really read it. I would just look at the pictures and the images, and I was just so fascinated by that at a very young age. So I think I've always been kind of geared towards that stuff. Although I didn't know anything, I didn't even know what physics was until I was, in college. But just scientific thinking in general, I think I was very interested in from a young age. And I think my mom helped plant that seed first. But then it was really my dad who got me comfortable with logic. So I used to always feel kind of weird, because I was I would always see my mom was really emotional, and I never quite understood how her mind was thinking about things. So I always would interpret it in a strange way. And I just thought everybody was kind of being overly emotional for some reason. It was kind of weird. When you're a kid, you don't really understand. Right. And then my dad, though, he kind of stuck up for me when he thought my mom was being too overly emotional or something, and he was like, he's fine. And I was like, oh, okay. It's actually okay for me to be logical if I want to be. So my dad kind of like gave me that. He's kind of the one who gave me that that comfort to be, as logical as I want to be. And yes, so then that combined, I think, and at a very young age, and that combined with my mom giving me the seed, it kind of, they really let me kind of be myself and be my own person, right, and grow my scientific interest over time. So my parents, I think, really gave me that really critical, like, first steps in this weird kind of, maybe by chance way, where they, allowed me to explore my interest fully.
And they didn't have any like experience with science themselves. Like growing up, like my experience in my household was like, my parents didn't know anything about science or math, and it was always up to me to kind of teach myself how to do anything.
Right.
Was it a similar experience in your household, or?
So my mom was horrible with math, but she's really clever and creative. So my mom would do these games with us. She would play. So we would do math rap. So she had this math rap on cassette, and we would do rapping of the math. So he would just be like, 1 + 1 is 2. 5 times 3 is 15. And shit like that. So we would just listen to these cassettes in the car.
You're dating
and she
yourself.
would do like these math games. Like we like at the pool, and all these kids would join in too. Like at the pool, they loved it. My mom would do flashcards, and she'd hold up like 5 and like 5. And then she'd put an operator in the middle, and it'd be 5 times 5, 25. And you'd have to guess the number before you jumped into the pool.
Oh, okay.
And then if you couldn't guess it in time, then you'd get like a penalty or something. So she would do all these like clever games that actually would trick you into learning.
I see. Yeah.
So she loved doing that kind of stuff. My dad, my dad was an engineer,
Right.
so he had heavy background in, of course,
Right.
not to the level of a physicist, but he at least was up to calculus.
Yeah.
But he was he was not good at explaining at a very low level.
Okay.
So my dad would get very frustrated very quickly if you didn't understand something immediately. So it was really left to my mom to kind of give me the foundation.
I see.
And then I was able to take it from there myself. So my parents really, they did, I always felt like as a kid that, I guess maybe not just my parents, but I felt like a lot of people just didn't have the answers that I wanted. Okay. But that was actually kind of what fueled me more. So I always felt unsatisfied. I was never really a kid who liked just because I said so, right, or just cause, or the typical answer of adults. Right. So I kind of learned very early that if I'm going to be satisfied with what I want to understand, I'm going to have to learn it all myself, pretty much. So that was just like it was very young. I had that spark of just, I'm going to have to figure all this stuff out myself. Yeah. And it was fun because, I had a lot of practice just analyzing things myself at the level that I really wanted to go. So, yeah, I think my parents just gave me the most important elements of just, they sowed the seeds by making me comfortable being my own weird self and not trying to throw their opinions on me. My dad was really good at not forcing his opinions on me. Like he would let me believe whatever I want, even if it was dumb, and then he would just not enforce his will on me ever.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, my dad was kind of similar, but this kind of brings us to like a tangent, but something that I think seems like it's important to you is like, was there any, like, were your parents religious at all?
Yeah. So my parents are Christian to this day.
Okay.
Although I think I'm incepting them. for the layman audience, I'm incepting. I'm meaning like if you know the movie Inception, where they plant the seed in the guy's mind, and it's kind of like rewiring his brain to think a different way. So I've been incepting my parents for many years. My dad's pretty much almost fully, I think, converted at this point. Or he won't say it, but I know he's getting there. Okay. But yes, they're very religious. I used to be religious for about 17 years. Okay. So this was most of my life I was religious. Well, how old am I now? Yeah, I guess most of my life still. Almost not. So I'm 31. But yeah, I've been religious for 17 years of my life. But came a crossroads. So, you know, when you're in school, especially in high school, and you're all insecure and you don't know what the hell you want to do in life, you're trying to figure yourself out in the world. You're like, okay. Especially this was kind of prompted after me losing to debates, you know, for religion. Oh, and I fucking hate losing to debates. So I was like, okay, I got to settle this. I'm going to go ham on this now. I'm going to prove that Christianity is right and that we can somehow make this fit into the scientific framework. I'm going to do all this. I'm going to prove these people wrong from their own science. And I'm going to shut all these motherfuckers down. So I studied a bunch of shit on. So I started with philosophy, and then I kind of migrated down like psychology. And then along that path, so I started philosophy, psychology, and then I started migrating into more hard sciences like physics, and not so much like chemistry or anything, but like towards physics. So it's like philosophy, psychology, physics. And I just went down a rabbit hole for like a good year maybe. And I started becoming more and more agnostic. And I was like, oh, shit. I think I'm starting to maybe switch. So the more and more evidence I saw, it was just like, damn. Just religion has no ghost of a chance of being correct compared to this system. And it was almost like the golden light of my life. It was like probably one of the most critical moments of my life was just discovering physics, because I was like, man, physics is just, it was like the system that I've been looking for all my life, because it was something that was so rigorous and just so fundamentally just satisfying in its answers. Like when you really can understand a physics concept, I mean, we all know the feeling. It's just like, damn, you just know it's so fucking, it just gives you such a satisfaction of rightness that you don't get from a lot of other things. Because, you know, like you're in like the soft sciences, psychology, you're always like, I can think of something else that might be true. Right. And I can think of 5 other things that might be true. It could be right. It's probably right, but maybe not. You know, just physics just makes it so right, though. When you see the answer, you're just like, that is fucking satisfying. You know, especially when you can all arrive at the same answer, you know, from 3 different approaches. It's so convincing. So for me, it was just like, once I found the power of physics, I just realized how many leaps and bounds above it was at describing the universe, specifically describing the universe. Right. I was just like, I'm done with anything religious. Yeah. And that was kind of the first moment for me realizing that, okay, there's something here for sure. And I lost my religion pretty much, you know, after that point. It was just like full ham science mode, you know. And then, of course, there were some other things I had to resolve where it was like the occult stuff. I got heavy into like ghosts and, you know, and, what else is there?
Spirits, I don't know. Poltergeist.
That's the same thing, like ghosts. Conspiracy theories. Okay. So like UFOs and stuff and, you know, all that kind of shit. Oh, Illuminati. All of that stuff I started getting heavily into.
Yeah, your co-host is still heavily into that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, Juan, he's he's my co-host on the Eigen Bros. We actually talked about UFOs last week. We'll post it up soon. That's one that I still kind of like have that I love. It's like my guilty pleasure. Okay. Like I dabble in it a little bit. Right. But yeah.
It's your guilty pleasure in that you feel like it's irrational, but you want it to be true? Or
no, not in the sense that I want it to be true or anything. It's just that it's one of these things that's kind of a culty. Yeah. But it's got enough things in there that are like interesting to me that I could be convinced that it's logically sound that it could exist. Okay. But yeah, you can listen to the podcast if you want to find out more about that.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. What was the question? I forget now.
Don't ask me.
Yeah, you gotta watch my rambling.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, just talking about, you know, religion in the household, right? So like, how eventually physics kind of broke that hold over you.
Right. So yes. So so that's the thing. Though. Also, I feel like, for me personally, I think one of the most important things for myself is understanding the universe. So whatever system it is, I didn't care if it had to be physics. I just go with whatever the best system is that I feel.
Right.
And I just don't think, well, I know. I'm not going to be a soft, I'm going to give hard opinions. Religion is not a system for explaining the universe. It just isn't. It just doesn't have anything that holds up to this modern day. It just is clearly an antiquated method of trying to explain things. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's just so critical of a thing to know in life.
Right.
That I felt like I cannot rest on my laurels. I can't give soft opinions on this because I think people are too coddled a lot of times with things that are this critical.
Right.
You have to understand your place in life. You got to understand the human condition. You've got to understand how the real world works, because the thing is, if you don't, that could actually wind up hurting you in the future.
Right.
And if it doesn't hurt you, maybe it hurts society in the long run. So I think people have a responsibility to live in reality. Although we love fantasy and whatnot, so I don't knock people who realize that it's fantasy. But when you start thinking that the fantasy is reality is when it becomes a problem, because then you get legislation for not teaching evolution in schools. You get legislation for banning people from talking about climate change. These things are real things that affect us.
Right.
And I just want to stamp these fires out as effectively as I possibly can. So even with my parents, I will never say grace at the dinner table ever again. Some people think I'm being disrespectful, and they're like, come on, bro. It's just your parents. Just give them that. But to me, I say, I can't, because it's just so important to me that people live in the real world. You just cannot let that fantasy take over.
Right.
So I really try to be diligent, even with my parents, who I love very much. I have to be true with them and say I don't want to lie to them, because I don't want them to be vulnerable or manipulated by people. When you don't live in reality, you become very easily manipulated, or at least easier than you should be, because you believe elements of fantasy and people can exploit you with that.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple things I would add on to that is I think it's really interesting. Like, the main problem I have with religion or dogma or fundamentalism in general is that it's just such a clear example of irrational thinking, and how there's this asymmetry and how we apply it here but not in other places in your life. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's just so strange how comfortable they feel doing that. It's just it's really baffling to me.
I get it though, because the thing is, I've come from that place,
right?
So I understand it. It's so powerful, man. Yeah. When you're in, it's the whole indoctrination thing. This is why when you're a kid, it's so critical to indoctrinate kids when you're young. If you're someone who's religious, because when you're indoctrinated, man, it's almost it's such a powerful force that even the most logical people are susceptible to it, because your framework is built upon that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, what happens when you're relearning things, or when you're unlearning things, or when you're getting new knowledge, is something that goes against your base framework that you've built up for so long in your life, and you have to take that whole thing down.
Yeah.
It's like demolishing a whole building that you've been building your whole life.
Right.
So it hurts. It's like a painful thing. And that's why I think it's so hard for people to let go of it. That's why it was so hard for me to let go. I was also with the threat, with the Bible, I'm going to go to hell if I question, and it's uncomfortable, man. You don't want to have to rebuild all of that stuff. So when you've built that much on your foundation and it's that shaky, you're building a foundation on sand essentially. And if you do that, it doesn't feel good. But the thing to me that feels worse is toppling an even higher building. So, while you're at, let's say your building's I don't know, what's a kind of small building that's known. Your building might be at the level of a White House or something, right?
Okay.
If it's built on sand, you can knock that down and you can rebuild it pretty quickly. But if your building's the freaking Burj Khalifa, and it's built on sand, you don't want to knock that shit down. It's too fucking big, and you don't want to rebuild that. I guess it's a bad example, but
Right,
you
so-
know, you know what I'm trying to say.
Well, I don't know. Let me try to understand what you're trying to say. So the analogy is like, what do you mean by like building more upon it? Like, you mean like buying more into this notion of like religion and fundamentalism, like really buying into it, like to the degree at which you like build your foundation upon this thinking, like
So
like whether you
basically,
become like a priest or like something like that, or how
right,
much?
exactly. So like if you're a priest, imagine being a priest and dedicating decades of your life to believing in the existence of God. And then let's say one day you wake up and you're an atheist. That fucking hurts to try to rebuild. I mean, could you imagine your whole life?
Yeah.
Like imagine if you had well, I guess you wouldn't have a wife, you're a priest, right?
Wait,
Well,
could you have a wife? I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe it's not Catholic. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Depends on
think
the priest. So yeah, imagine if your whole family's Christian.
Yeah.
Your immediate family, your grandparents, your neighborhood, your community, people are looking up to you.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that can happen. Like, that's the worst, man. Imagine if you're being an atheist and you're like a pastor or a priest. That's what I'm talking about. If you're going that far in life with a foundation of sand because you didn't question the fundamental beliefs,
Right.
that's the kind of pain you can suffer because you've built so much around that.
Yeah.
And just imagine all the people you would be letting down. Imagine all the life that you just have not wasted. I'm sure you would do good things, but you know, it's just like, I don't want to put myself through that.
Right.
I would rather keep blowing down my foundation until it's fucking like solid. You know, I want my shit to be made out of adamantium. You know, I don't want a shaky foundation whatsoever. So if I have to knock my shit down 100 times, I'll do it. The thing is, my foundation is so solid now, I know it ain't happening. So I've put in the work and I've actually deconstructed my own thinking at such a level now. I feel like my foundation is the strongest it's ever been.
Right. Yeah, I think
So I don't have any real worry of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just about to say that that's probably like a common trait amongst a lot of physicists, but actually,
Well,
I'm rethinking that now because there's
I'm convinced.
there's quite a few who still have, you know, these religious tendencies and stuff like that. And it's like, you know, I'm not saying, I mean, it's muddy waters here. It's like, it's hard to say that they're not justified in that, but it's just like, to me, it seems like I was saying, just clear examples of not consistent rational thinking, right? It's just like applying a different standard of thought to this aspect of your life.
Right. To me, it's a split personality. It's like you're building two buildings.
Right.
So they realize, well, I don't know if they even realize, it's like one might be built on a foundation of sand, but they're like building two buildings at once. So they don't really notice how shaky the other one is. It's like I guess you can build two buildings, but to me, it's almost like that's a waste of energy. Like, why would you? And the thing is, it's like that's not living in reality either. Right. You're going back and forth between these two regimes that have no overlap.
Yeah, they're not compatible.
Yeah, they're not compatible.
Right.
So it's like, I guess you can live a split personality life, but like,
it's
just not consistent.
Yeah. So I guess one clarification I would put in here that I would want to get your opinion about is like, I'm perfectly okay with the notion of like spirituality, I guess you could say, in the sense that like, if you derive some sort of like alternative meaning to your own personal life as to like how you should go about thinking and how you should go about like being in the present moment, or, you know, how we might abstractly connect on some like, you know, higher dimensional thing that you recognize and acknowledge that it's not necessarily reality.
Right.
Then I'm perfectly okay with that. Right. It's just the fact that, you know, like you were saying, like how religion, I agree in the sense that religion is like an antiquated way of describing the universe. Right. If you wanted to tell me how the universe is, I need evidence. Right. Is the problem. Right. If you're going to make some claim about this, that there is some, you know, God, that there's some agent out there that cares about, you know, what you do, I need some way of like verifying that. But if you're just making some more abstract claim about, you know, how we all fit into this thing, how we all fit into the universe, right, and stuff like that, like I'm, you know, much more comfortable being agnostic on, I guess you could say.
Right.
Not taking such a hard line against it.
Right. Well, I'm pretty much with you. The only reason I'll take a very hard stance on religion and I'll claim complete atheism is because I analyze it from the framework of, if you're claiming religion, you're claiming that either God exists, Yahweh exists, whatever the fuck else there is.
Yeah.
Meaning that you're claiming that one of these deities that we've come up with exists. I'm never going to be bold enough to say that a God type entity can exist.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Like a higher power.
Right.
But the thing is, that's almost not even the argument to me. If you're claiming a religion and you say that a God exists,
Right.
like that means you're saying with a definitive stance that you know that a higher being exists, and it's one of these that have been named.
Yeah, it's a specific.
So I can clearly say I'm atheist against that. I can clearly debunk those just with the books that they have. Yeah. So I can debunk any religion. I just can't debunk that a higher power exists.
Yeah,
right?
in general, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So that's why I claim hard atheism.
Yeah,
Because it's like taking yourself down to the human level. Yeah, you can always go to the highest level of abstraction, but that's not what people are saying. They're clearly saying it's a Christian God, it's a Muslim God, it's a whatever the fuck God. So
yeah,
I can take a hard stance on that.
yeah. And do you think that there's a place in physics to try to probe this level of higher abstraction? Right.
Absolutely, I do. I don't think it exists at the moment because it's actually such a hard question and it's so far beyond us. I can't think of a way that you could ever even analyze that. Maybe something related to like drugs or psychology. I mean, like that. But even that, I'm not convinced either because that's chemicals. But yeah, I'm not convinced we can even go that level. It's just so far beyond us. It's like maybe we can. Like if we could figure out a way to escape our universe, then we might be able to start talking, right?
Yeah.
If we could somehow, if we got so fucking clever at some level, we could actually leave the universe, then yeah, we might be onto something. But right now, we are not even scratching the surface, bro.
Right.
So we ain't there.
How do you feel about that? I mean,
I don't know about
just because
Controversial.
again,
opinion.
putting you on the spot, like you don't have to respond to that, but it's just, I think that you might have some insight to say when it comes to this topic about, spirituality and, what we can probe and what we can't and stuff like that. But
I don't
not quite.
Do you think there is something to being spiritual though? And what does spirituality even mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to ask you that. How would you yourself define spirituality? And
So I guess for me, spirituality would just be trying to find a connectedness with the universe. And to me, I think we're actually lacking massively in spirituality, even religious people. I think people don't really understand what it means to be spiritual. To me, it's learning your connection with the things around you. Whether that be people, animals, nature, even inanimate objects,
yeah.
if you've taken LSD or fucking mushrooms at one point, you can feel connected to a goddamn chair.
Or you can feel like a pure wave function that collapses into nothingness.
Exactly. That's a great way of saying it almost. It's like you feel so connected. That's why I'll say on the record too, that's why I like drugs, because it's like if you can utilize that as a gateway to understanding that there is more to life than what you're living. Yeah. It shatters those boundaries of bullshit that we live in.
Yes.
It's almost like we're living in such a specific way of life.
Yeah.
We don't realize this ain't it. The universe is way more fucking scary than you. We're not scary. I don't want to say that, but the universe is way more interesting than you could possibly ever imagine. And, and mind altering substances can give you a little taste of just that. So, and to me, that actually is kind of being spiritual because for me, actually, drugs, if you utilize them properly, they can unlock your mind in a way that I think is what would I say? Is completely vital to. Not vital is not the right word, but I'm saying it's such a thing that is useful for the human condition, and I think it gets a really bad rap because, of course, you see addiction. And of course, in a society, we don't want to promote that kind of behavior because we just want to have a functioning society. So I get it.
Right.
But, you know, the thing is, to be spiritual, it can help to have something to awaken that in you and to understand it. And for me, like mushrooms or psilocybin was a way that I did that myself. And I kind of it just gave me perspective, man. It just really makes you realize that you live your own life. You're in charge of your own life. Love the people around you as much as you possibly can. Love nature as much as you possibly can, and enjoy life. You know, because we only get one shot, at least as far as we know. Maybe not. You know, we you know, the universe is modeled with harmonic oscillators in many ways. So maybe the universe itself is a harmonic oscillator. Who fucking knows? I'm just gonna live my life in a way where this is the one shot I get, and I'm gonna fucking squeeze the hell out of this chance that I get. You know. So
to like rephrase that or put another spin is basically, you might argue, like the utility function of drugs, particularly psychoactive drugs, is to increase man or humankind's capacity for empathy or things like that, of seeing a connection between other people and other things and other creatures, right? That where you might have previously been blind to that.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's just, I think it's because it's just such a, it's such a different state of mind that it will always be a significant moment in someone's life, you know? So I just think it's just so, it's so underutilized today. You know, of course it's getting better and things, and it's getting more accepted. I don't know if you heard, Denver actually just legalized psilocybin.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
Or not legalized, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Decriminalized. So you won't be arrested for having it, but that's the next step.
Okay.
So I think it's great, man. As long as you are using drugs for the right reasons, you know, not for addiction or filling a hole, as a way of expanding the mind and feeling more connected to people and things.
Right. Yeah. So in general, I agree with you. And it's just, I guess in my own personal life, I would rather I don't think it's necessary to have that type of drug experience to reach that state of enlightenment, if you want to call it that. But it can be useful for a lot of people, is what I would say. I would say, like, a lot of people, I think, would have a lot of difficulty reaching that next step were not for that push in that direction.
I agree.
I think certain minds and certain people can, you know, reach that level without ever having to touch a drug.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think another avenue would be meditation.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of those guys, like Buddhist monks, are really they're on to something. I think it may not be as supernatural as some people might think, you know, where they're fucking opening their chakras and whatnot, but I think they are on to something for sure, because they literally spend so much of their time just trying to be connected and doing things in such a way where they're, you know, they're sitting with their thoughts, you know, all the time.
Yeah.
And just, they live such a minimalist life. They really understand, like, what matters, you know, in the long run. Of course, it's an extreme way of living, and I don't think that everybody needs to do that, of course. But I think there's a lot of ways we can be more spiritual, and I think it's really just finding that way to be connected more with people and with the universe in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
However that may be.
I think that's going to be an important next step for humanity in terms of, like, updating our software, you know.
I absolutely agree.
Is like becoming a little bit more aware of our connectedness. I think so many people really aren't present really in the moment and really have a lot of difficulty seeing beyond their own mind and empathizing with other people. And I think that's, like, a big, I guess a big byproduct is the polarization of society and stuff like that, is just because, like, me personally having this scientific perspective amplifies that, right? Like, knowing that we're basically nothing in the universe, right? And that we're all just, like, on this floating rock in the middle of, like, we're just an infinitesimal speck in the grand scheme of things, right? So
we're nothing and something at the same time.
Right. And so,
like, something significant and something completely who gives a fuck at the same time, right? That's the beauty of life, though. You know, there's so many dichotomies, and it's just like you can only really appreciate it if you actually just take a step back. We're so concerned with dumb shit these days. Like fucking Instagram, Twitter, who gives a fuck? I mean, I get it. I understand. It's important, right? And it's fun. And if that's what you want to do in life and, you know, you're trying to get places, you got to be human, of course. But at the end of the day, you really always got to kind of remember what matters, you know. Your fucking Instagram account doesn't matter. You goddamn what people are saying about you doesn't matter. What your mom's thinking about your whatever, your girlfriend or whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. These things just don't matter. You need to always remember perspective.
Right.
And this is something that I don't know if you've ever heard of Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah.
I love that guy. He's probably one of my favorite entrepreneurs, at least top 5. He always talks about that perspective. You got to keep your perspective in life, and then you just feel so free, you know, because you can do whatever the hell you want at that point.
Yeah, and I'm just remembering we kind of got on a big sidetrack from, you know, where I'm about to go is you know, my dad and my stepmom, you know, asked that I say grace at every at every meal also, and I kind of oblige that, just because I don't know, like perhaps, you know, I could be argued into thinking that you might argue that I ought to take a harder line with them. It's just I feel like what they would get out of, you know, rationality, what they would get out of, you know, a logical, consistent way of thinking wouldn't provide value to their life.
Right.
Right. I think it would actively detract from, you know, the meaning and what my father would find interesting in life. Like a big part of his life is spirituality, right? He was in the Moonies at one point, and
in the what?
In the Moonies, it's a cult.
Oh, really? I never heard of this.
Right. He's hopped from religion to religion, but the Moonies, basically there was this guy from South Korea, Sun Myung Moon, who claimed to be the next coming of Jesus. Right. And
it seems a common theme.
Right. So a lot of people, you know, bought into that. The cult is still around nowadays, and I'm
sure.
So as a result, they think that the Koreans are the chosen people and stuff like that. And anyways, so spirituality has been a big component of his life, and as a result, I don't think there's been like a big emphasis in terms of like, you know, like for me, a cornerstone of my life is that I want my views on the world to be logically consistent. I want my views to be rational. You know, I want them to be verified by evidence. You know, it's important that, you know, what I think is true is true. That's important to me. I don't know if it's as important to him. I mean, I guess it ought to be. Like maybe it's like, I don't know.
Should I comment?
Yeah. What do you think? Should I take a harder line with him?
I think it's all subjective, man. I think you do you. You're probably not as much of a douche as me sometimes. I'm kind of more of a, I think I'm more of a crusader for that.
Okay.
I know you're a nicer guy, Joe, so I think you just do what you feel is correct, man. It's my crusade, right? So that's a battle I choose to do. You know, there's many battles you can fight in life, and I think certain people have certain battles and things that they live for. One of my, I guess it's just very important to me to always make sure the people around me are just not taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Who can see past bullshit. And yeah, just don't get fucked over by manipulators. Right. And to me, that's just so important to me that I make sure that everyone around me understands that if something is bullshit, I'm going to fucking call you out. I'm going to call me out. I'm going to call anyone out on it.
Yeah.
You know, because I just think it's too important.
Yeah.
I don't want to have anyone I know become part of a cult or be taken advantage of because they're giving all their money to some fucking idiot who claims to be Jesus. Right. Not saying anything bad about your stepfather. I mean, because it happens. You know, I've been susceptible to things. I've been scammed. And that's the thing. It just makes me feel weak, and it makes me feel like, you know, I just don't like that feeling, right? I don't like when someone manipulates me into something, and to me, that's just something that I have to actively fight.
Right. No,
it's my battle.
No, I agree. To clarify, like I have had a conversation with him about like, yeah, like now I think we're more up to date as like, I don't think what you believe in is rational, right? I don't think it's justifiable. Like, why do you believe this? Blah, blah, blah. And we've had a long conversation about it. And I think he's more, he understands my perspective on the matter. And he's like, yeah, I could see that. He just chooses to not accept it, right? But so since we're at that point, like where it's just like he understands my perspective, it's just like I feel not the need to constantly have that battle. Yeah, I guess you could say. But it's an interesting comment that you had. Is like what you're saying is like science and logic, I guess more generally, is a tool to protect yourself versus against like charlatans, against people who would take advantage of you.
That's probably one of the like instinctive drivers for why I even do it. To me, logic is freedom. It's like a way to make sure you're not taken advantage of. I've been scammed so many times because I didn't understand things well enough. So now I've gotten to such a level, nowadays where I feel like I could see I can sniff out anything now pretty much. Yeah. You're going to have a very tough time trying to pull the wool over my eyes nowadays. Yeah. And the thing is, I understand the process of that. That's because I've literally questioned every single thing that I've ever, thought about or had a question about. I've taken the lumps by getting fucked over many times. It's a process. That's the thing. And to me, almost like, and also that's another reason why I'm maybe so more adamant about it, because I've been through it. So people I don't want everybody to have to go through that. Right. So the people around me who I care about, I want to preserve them so that I took the lumps. At least listen to me then. I've seen this shit. I understand the signs, so I want to say, so I'm like, at least take it from me. Yeah. I don't like bullshit, and people know how much I hate bullshit. Yeah. So I feel like that's my crusade. At least if people see that I am saying it's bullshit, maybe they'll think twice. Yeah. That's all I can ask for,
Yeah. I mean, that's.
Oh, I was just going to ask with your family, I mean, how they came to the beliefs that they have, and your father in particular, and like, did he question reality to come up with those beliefs, or did he just take on pieces that others told him and put them together as his foundation, which I think is like what defines a weak foundation, is something that you take from others and you create to be your foundation, versus questioning, like analyzing the world and coming up with your own conclusions, and that is what creates the strong foundation.
Well, I think you could take from others, but you have to filter.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you still have to question, process, and see whether that actually fits into whatever you perceive as your real world reality, right? So, what? I'll just watch the mic.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say my dad didn't necessarily. I can't speak for his experience, but my impression is that it was probably part of his life, right? Like I think his father and mother were religious, as far as I know. But the way he talks about it, it doesn't sound like it was a major emphasis. I don't know. It seems like he's the one who went out to make it a major emphasis. He did question it. He studied, religious studies in college. He was interested in it, right? He's looked at the broader picture. He's jumped from religion to religion because he questions these things, right? You don't just go from one religion to the next without at least having asked the question of like, is this, the most accurate representation of my beliefs, right? It's just perhaps
he's moving though lateral too much.
Right, exactly. Like perhaps to the rigor, that I would ask questions, it wouldn't satisfy those criteria. But for him, it might be completely satisfactory. So I would say he has questioned these things. And I would just, if it were me, I would push him to question it more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure whatever you're doing is fine, Joe. I know you've got a good, a light touch.
Depends. It depends on who you talk to, really. It's just like,
I guess I've never seen you really like riled up though.
Yeah, no, you've never
You're just
seen
always
me,
so chill.
You've never seen me get into like heated debates with Mahia or anything like that.
Oh, really? You get it with Mahia?
Yeah, like, well, we've been friends for like years before grad school.
I'd love to see that.
And it's just like, it's just like now I'm at a point of like peace of just like, it was really heated with him just because I'm like, how could you believe these things? Like, it's,
Juan gets me
you have
fired up.
experience.
exactly.
I don't know if you've seen the last podcast with Juan.
Yeah. But now imagine having that type of argument in like every aspect of his life. It's just like, okay, like I will get heated when it comes to some of that stuff, and it's just because it seems like he's not even listening to reason.
Right. Well, I have another thing also. I'm a little bit more harsh on physicists too. So I'm really more harsh on people who are intellectual authorities, because I feel like if you're going to be considered an intellectual authority, you have to also have the rigor to back it up. So for me, if I had like the perfect system for me to design of like what a physicist should be, I would make sure that you've completely questioned your own beliefs first, and then you'd have to spill it out all on the table and explain exactly why you believe these things from a logical framework, and have deconstructed yourself so much that you've built yourself up to a higher level. Unless you already have all the justifications and you can just work past that. But I think that's a very critical thing to me, at least, to be an intellectual authority. If you're going to have the authority to speak on something like how the universe works, you need to be speaking about it with the authority that you've earned, right?
Right.
From a scientific, logical framework. And this is why I get a little bit, if you're believing in religion at the same time, to me, that doesn't seem like you've put in that legwork then. If you're going to be an authority on how the universe operates and you're utilizing two completely incompatible systems and one that's so far removed from any kind of, what would you say, from any kind of credibility, it's like, dude, you got some major deconstructing that needs to go on internally.
Right. So in general, I agree with you for like, if you want to call yourself a physicist, that's something you ought to do. But just because, someone believes in something silly doesn't necessarily invalidate their next claim of, how the way the universe works, just because they don't necessarily have the understanding or the rigor or the language to describe their thoughts mathematically or whatever. Doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong.
But it's like somebody who failed a bunch of businesses telling you how to run a business.
Right. Right. No, I understand.
So it's like you're going to be,
right.
Like, why is this person
right. I understand from like a statistical, I guess, Bayesian standpoint is like you have all this evidence prior that they don't put in this consistent level of thinking to their thoughts.
It's adding contradiction when there doesn't need to be.
Right.
If you can just simply look into yourself, deconstruct your own reality, and then build it back up.
Right.
And it's like, to me, it's like a critical process that you have to go through in order to be an authority on speaking about how the universe works. Because then it shows that you're serious about having things work in a consistent and logical framework.
Right. I agree with you, but
that's completely consistent.
But I guess where I might add to that is clearly you can't apply that to every single thought you're ever going to have. Right.
To every single what?
You can't necessarily deconstruct every single aspect of your life. Like in you might think that that's possible, but I think in principle that's probably almost... No,
I don't think so. But the thing is, why I'm saying in particular for physicists is because that's literally their job. So if that is what your career is to understand the mechanics of the universe, then you have a responsibility to actually understand how the universe works. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why I have a higher standard for physicists.
Right.
It's kind of like Gordon Ramsay, why he fucking yells all the time at chefs, and why he's a fucking asshole to all these chefs, because they should know better, right? They're the ones who say they can cook and they've gone through the process. Then you should already know, right? And that's why he's fucking so nice to the chef juniors. They shouldn't know any better, right? They don't know shit.
Right.
So they're the ones getting built up, and you have to encourage them, right? But yeah, that's the thing. If you're going to claim and be an intellectual authority, you better damn well be one. So I think you make people better around you too if you're more scrutinized, if you're more scrutinizing that fashion. Because the thing is, like, someone else down the line may fucking obliterate you, you know, if you're not prepared to receive that level of analysis. You know, when someone's completely just shitting on all your beliefs, that's going to hurt a lot more, especially someone who you don't know, you know, because then they just shred you up and, you know, and then, you know, you're completely exposed. Mm-hmm. So that falls back into the whole vulnerability thing, you know, where I like to have everyone around me understand the level of scrutiny that's possible, you know, and maybe not go full force into it, but there are people that can potentially just rip you to shreds if you have that big of consistency in your logical frameworks.
I mean, it just, I guess I just hesitate a little bit on applying that level of rigor to people just because in my experience, I guess it just depends on where you draw the line of what you want to call an intellectual authority, right? Like, because in my experience, some of my mentors, some of my advisors, you know, whatever, I feel have kind of laid into me necessarily like too hard for like a level of rigor or understanding like that I don't have, that I don't know, right? And maybe they feel I should, but where does that, you know, justification in their head come from, right? Why do they feel like I should know these things when I don't?
See, I think that's a completely different thing though, because that to me is basically being a dickhead. So and I'll explain why. That's because they're laying into you when you're clearly a student. Mm. It's like, I'm in grad school because I don't know shit.
Right.
Like, that's the whole reason why you're here, to learn. You know, it's like, that would be like Gordon Ramsay cursing at the Master Chef Junior kids. Mm. It's like, no, they're there to learn. That's the whole point. That's the purpose. It's just that the thing is, the difference between that is because, just basically what I said. And then the thing is with religion versus science, that's something that you're not learning in school. That's something that you should already be applying because you're literally learning how to understand and interpret the universe and its mechanics. Right. So that is part of your job. Mm-hmm. So if you're not, and that's like a base level of analysis. That's a very low level analysis. Mm-hmm. If you just do a few months, I think, of really deep internal analysis and, scrutinizing of your own foundation, you should be able to solve that. I feel like physics problems are way harder than that. Right. You know.
Well, so the example I had in my head is just like when we were talking about Juan, right? About how, you know, he doesn't believe that we went to the moon.
Yeah.
Right. So I could understand it in that.
I'm going to hurt that kid. I love Juan. I'm just joking.
Right. In that specific example, right, I guess I could already see the argument coming is like, you know, that should be like a base level understanding, right? Is what you might argue. Is that something that you might say?
Let me think.
Why is it that?
Yeah, pretty much because he's a physicist. Right. That's the real big reason, though. When you're someone whose job is to understand the universe and the mechanics of the universe, you can't be saying the moon landings didn't happen. But you know,
I mean, you were telling me that
that's like, a base level.
Like he's also a student, though, right? This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but
at this point, you know,
but he's too far for that. That would be like a physicist not knowing how to do multiplication. So it's like you gotta know the basics, right? So yeah, that's like a PhD not knowing how to multiply. It's like, dude, you can't be here if you don't know how to multiply. You know what I'm saying? So you gotta learn the basics and the foundational things. You gotta have to understand how to analyze systems and to rule out bad logic and bad just things that are inconsistent, right?
Right. So I think Juan, would be an interesting case study of like how clearly there's going to be areas of his life where he won't be able to meet that level of rigor that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's not necessarily for him. I don't know. Like it seems like maybe a psychological barrier rather than like a mental faculty barrier, right? Because he could clearly perform some of these calculations, right? He can clearly understand some of these really difficult concepts, but logically rationalizing through a whole argument, there's some difficulty there.
Right. I think it's just a matter of getting his critical thinking skills up to par. So I think critical thinking skills should be taught more at a younger age. I don't think we really do that well. And it's like, you shouldn't be able to be at such high levels and not have good critical thinking skills, right? Because that's just such an important part of life to understand anything at a higher level. You got to have critical thinking skills. So the fact that, we just rotely teach these physical concepts and things, and then one might have these, I don't want to stop using one as an example.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to pick on them either.
Yeah, but people have, maybe a lack of critical thinking.
Yeah.
To me, that's actually a problem with the system as well.
Right.
So it's like you need a certain base level of critical thinking skills to be able to get to, X level in physics. So it's like it shows not a understanding of how to deconstruct arguments and look at evidence and see when the evidence is mounted up at such a level to you can pretty much say that this has a higher chance of being correct than something else.
Right. The level to which you should be convinced by an argument.
Exactly.
Right. And so, I mean, I don't know I don't personally have any ideas as to how we could implement that. I mean, what do you think, Irene, what tools from like an educational standpoint could we implement to try to help, young people increase their critical thinking capacities? I mean, I just asked because, you have some experience, in an educational background, right? Doing some research on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that what I think is really important, maybe starting at, a young age, would be to teach children how to be critical of themselves, how to understand themselves and I guess, talking about spirituality as we have before, I think it's important that we start teaching spirituality or teaching children to look outside of themselves. I know that might be hard because they're young, so how exactly do you implement that? But I think that identity building is really important. So I think that there should be like a class dedicated for every grade level that is exploring questions. How are you feeling? Exploring emotions. What does emotions mean? And that I think can help a lot with.
I still need that. Jesus, I would kill for that class.
It'll help students connect socially as well. So they'll see, they're having similar emotional responses to things that I feel during the day. Like I get upset about this or that. And that helps kids connect with each other and understand that they may be having difficulties about things going on in school or at home. And in that way, I feel it'll cut back on bullying. I know this is kind of seems like it's detracting from the critical thinking.
No, it's okay.
But I think a major issue of why people don't really question their reality is because they're not even taught to understand who they are and what they are, and understanding their own emotional reactions to the things that they're presented with. So I feel a lot of times there's a solidification within you of these beliefs that you've grown up with as children, right? And you're not really taught how to question your reality or understand your emotions or understand why you have such a strong connection to these ideas that were brought to you, emotional connections, right? So I feel just starting at that level, teaching children about their emotions, what they mean, and then breaking them apart in a group setting or individual setting, I think is just starting to sow the seeds so they can start thinking more critically. I mean, it first starts with them thinking critically about their own emotions and who they are, and then it can expand to learning about just having them explore different settings or questions by themselves, and then coming together and say, what did you get out of that? What do you think is happening here? And have them come with their own ideas and their own theories that they then you can give them some tools in the classroom that they can use, whether they be like some math or some biological mechanisms that you give them that they can put together to understand and see whether their idea actually makes sense or not. So I think like we have to give them more utility. It's more like you're teaching them this is the way reality is, these are the facts you need to know. And I think it's more like you should teach them, what do you think is going on here? Here are some tools that could be helpful. Do you see how it could come together? So it's more like kids need to be driving their own learning. And right now, I think the education system, the way that it is way too systematic and structured. It's hindering that, which I think is important.
Right. Okay. So I have something to add on to that I don't want to lose is if I were to rephrase what you're telling me, it's basically you feel that perhaps giving students or young children the tools of self-reflection is what would be the way forward in terms of teaching them critical thinking skills as well. Like not only self-reflection of like your mental models of the universe, but also of their own, mental states.
Yes.
And whereas the system that we have now is a little more, it's independent of the self, right? It's to rephrase what you're saying is like they're giving you facts about the universe. You just have to accept them as what they are,
yes,
rather than being able to come to that conclusion yourself,
yes,
from the inside.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I could see the utility of that.
Yeah, I think people don't get a lot of practice with that, honestly. Right. I think that's kind of like why I like one of Jeremiah's classes where he talks about the order of magnitudes class.
Right. We just did that.
I've never been it. I guess you guys could talk more about it, but to me, it just sounded like a great idea because you're, building things without any math. You're not being so attached to the math now, where you can kind of critically think your way through problems, just based on what you know.
Right.
So I think more things like that, like philosophy, where you actually you are forced to now take certain positions and justify them. Like in a philosophy class, like, one of the first weeks we were like, why do you believe in God? And then people were just like, oh shit. Like that kind of stuff is what people need. You need to be thrown in the deep end and kind of to see, if you can sink or swim or not. Yeah. And these questions are so important. It's just like, I don't know why we're not doing these at a younger age. Yeah. Like we don't need 13 years of English class. Like get rid of a few of those classes and put in a philosophy course or something, that actually prompts you to answer these questions or ask even these questions. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think we're coming up on probably a good time to stop. So I just have a couple quick questions for you, Terence, before we wrap up.
Fire away.
One is, given your unique perspective on the field of physics now, right, having come in and out of the field, if someone, perhaps close to you, like one of your friends came up and told you, I'm interested in getting into physics, what advice would you give them?
Oh man, that's a damn good question. I would say absolutely go for it, man. If you love it, for sure. I think physics is one of the most rewarding things you can ever get into, and I mean it's just so fun to me. It's like it's just something that is just so useful in life. I feel like that, if that's what you're into, 100%, I would say go for it. Of course, with my position though, I've left early out of my program, but that's not to say anything bad about physics that I don't enjoy it. It's just that, you got to know what you want. I've gotten what I've wanted out of this class. Of course, I probably could take classes forever realistically and be completely fine with that. But, it's just a matter of what do you want to do ultimately in life. So I would say, of course, just be self-aware and mindful of what you want to do in life, and don't feel pressurized do things in anybody else's way. You know, you don't have to be Einstein, but I say absolutely do physics and go for it if you want to do it. Yeah. But do it your own way.
Excellent. Yeah, nothing to add to that. But okay, so then the last thing is we briefly talked about it, but if you have any like, so you're working on, you know, building your current future prospects, but do you want to talk about those? Is there anything that you want to plug perhaps prematurely, or like where they could catch you or anything like that?
I guess I don't really have much to show yet. So I'm so early staged and everything. I'm still trying to figure out what the hell exactly I'm going to do.
Right on.
But yeah, thus is life, right? I'm always lost. But I'll just say I'll plug Eigenbros. So that's my podcast.
Okay.
It's EIGENBROS. And that's with me and my buddy Juan. He's another graduate student. And that's probably the most consistent project I have right now. And there's other things maybe on the horizon, but that's all I'll be comfortable with plugging for now. But yeah we'll see in the future.
But anyways, so it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, man. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And
absolutely, man. I'm glad to be the first one.
Yeah, thank you.
Hopefully we could have another one of these sometime.
Absolutely, anytime.